The Battle of Stalingrad, 1942-1943. The turning of the tide, the city on the Volga. By the summer of 1942, the war in Europe had reached a deadly stalemate. Nazi Germany had conquered almost all of continental Europe, from the Atlantic coast to the outskirts of Moscow. But Hitler wanted more. His goal was nothing less than the complete destruction of the Soviet Union and the seizure of its vast natural resources. The failure of Operation Barbarossa in 1941 had shocked the German High Command. The Red Army had refused to collapse, and the harsh Russian winter had crushed German hopes of a quick victory. Yet Hitler was convinced he could still deliver a knockout blow. In June 1942, he launched a new offensive, Operation Blue, aimed at capturing the oil fields of the Caucasus and the industrial city of Stalingrad, a vital hub on the river Volga. Stalingrad was not only a major industrial center, it also bore the name of his greatest rival, Joseph Stalin. To Hitler, capturing Stalingrad would humiliate the Soviet leader and secure Germany's southern flank. To Stalin, losing the city that carried his name was unthinkable. He issued a brutal order: not one step back. There would be no retreat, no surrender. As German tanks and infantry swept east across the open steppe, the Soviet defenders dug in, preparing for a last stand. Civilians, soldiers and workers all took part in building defenses around the city. What followed would become one of the most savage battles in human history. A fight waged street by street, house by house, and cellar by cellar. Over 6 months, 2 million men would fight to the death in a city reduced to rubble. For the Germans, Stalingrad would become a graveyard. For the Soviets, it would become a symbol of endurance. The battle that was about to unfold would not only decide the fate of a city, it would determine the future of the Second World War. The German advance, Operation Blue. The German summer offensive began with confidence. The Wehrmacht had regrouped, re-equipped, and learned from its earlier mistakes. Hitler split his forces into 2 main groups. Army Group A pushed deep into the Caucasus toward the oil fields at Baku, while Army Group B, under General Friedrich Paulus, advanced toward the Volga River and Stalingrad. Initially, the plan worked. The Soviets were caught off guard by the speed of the German advance. In July and August, the Luftwaffe dominated the skies, and Soviet forces suffered heavy losses. On August 23, 1942, more than 1,000 German bombers unleashed a devastating raid on Stalingrad. The city was engulfed in flames. Entire districts were obliterated. Tens of thousands of civilians were killed in a single day. But what the Germans believed was a victory only set the stage for a nightmare. The ruins created by their bombs would soon become a fortress for the defenders. Across the Volga, Soviet reinforcements streamed into the city, often under heavy artillery and aerial bombardment. General Vasily Chuikov, commander of the 62nd Army, took charge of the defense. He vowed, "We will hold the city or die in it." Chuikov ordered his men to fight at point-blank range, where German air power and artillery could not be used effectively. As German tanks pushed into the outskirts, they found themselves fighting not a conventional army, but an entire population armed with rifles, Molotov cocktails, and sheer determination. The Germans captured the suburbs and much of the industrial north, but they were bleeding with every meter gained. The stage was set for one of the most intense and unforgiving urban battles the world had ever seen. A battle the soldiers would soon call Rattenkrieg, the War of the Rats. Urban hell, not one step back. By late September, Stalingrad had become a living hell. The city was reduced to ash and concrete, yet both armies fought with ferocious determination. The German 6th Army pressed forward street by street, capturing factories, railway stations, and apartment blocks. But every gain was met with a Soviet counterattack. The defenders of the 62nd Army fought with unmatched resilience. They held the tractor factory, the grain elevator, the barricade factory, all names that would become legends. His snipers prowled the ruins, hunting men across bombed-out courtyards. Among them was Vasily Zaitsev, a Siberian marksman whose deadly precision turned him into a Soviet hero. His duels with German snipers became symbols of the entire battle, a war fought one shot at a time. The fighting was so close that combatants could hear each other breathing through walls. Soldiers fought in basements, stairwells, and sewer tunnels. Entire buildings changed hands several times a day. Stalin's infamous Order Number 227, issued in July, declared that retreat was forbidden. Not one step back. Those who disobeyed faced execution or punishment battalions. The result was fanatical defense, a city that refused to die. For the Germans, Stalingrad was becoming a trap. They were exhausted, low on ammunition, and unable to maneuver their tanks through the ruins. The Luftwaffe, stretched thin across the front, could no longer provide reliable support. Still, Hitler demanded that Paulus take the city at any cost. By November, the Germans controlled nearly 90% of Stalingrad. Yet in the frozen outskirts, Soviet armies were massing. Stalin and his generals had been preparing a counterblow, a trap that would encircle the entire German Sixth Army and turn victory into annihilation. The encirclement, Operation Uranus. By November 1942, the German Sixth Army was deeply entrenched within the ruins of Stalingrad. Hitler's obsession with taking the city had consumed his attention and his reserves. What the Germans did not know was that the Soviets had been secretly preparing a massive counteroffensive. Under the command of Generals Georgy Zhukov and Alexander Vasilevsky, the Red Army planned to encircle the German forces in Stalingrad and cut them off completely. The operation was codenamed Operation Uranus. It would not strike the German front lines directly, but the weaker flanks held by their allies, Romanian, Hungarian, and Italian divisions, who were poorly equipped for the brutal winter conditions. On November 19, 1942, the Soviets launched their attack. Over 1 million men surged forward, supported by thousands of tanks and artillery guns. The Axis flanks collapsed within days. 2 massive Soviet pincers raced across the frozen steppe, meeting near the town of Kalak on November 23rd. The trap had closed. Inside the city, over 250,000 German and Axis soldiers, the entire Sixth Army and parts of the 4th Panzer Army were completely encircled. When informed of the disaster, Hitler forbade any breakout attempt. Instead, he ordered Paulus to hold his ground, promising that the Luftwaffe would supply the trapped army by air. But this was impossible. To sustain the Sixth Army required over 700 tons of supplies a day. The Luftwaffe could deliver barely 100. As temperatures plunged to -30 degrees Celsius, the pocket, or Kessel, descended into starvation and despair. Ammunition ran low. Soldiers burned furniture for warmth. Horses were slaughtered for food. Soviet forces tightened the noose, capturing airfields and cutting off escape routes. The once mighty German Sixth Army was now trapped in a frozen tomb on the banks of the Volga, and its fate was sealed.
As December 1942 turned into January 1943, the situation inside Stalingrad was catastrophic. Hitler's promise of air supply had failed. Fuel was gone, ammunition was scarce, and the wounded froze to death in their shelters. Rations were reduced to a few grams of bread a day, despite pleas from his generals. Hitler refused to allow an evacuation or breakout. He promoted Friedrich Paulus to field marshal, hinting that no German field marshal had ever surrendered, an unmistakable message to fight to the death. Outside the city, the Germans attempted a desperate rescue. Operation Winter Storm, led by Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, tried to break through from the south in mid-December. For a time, Manstein's forces reached within 50 kilometers of the trapped Sixth Army. But without Paulus's cooperation, the effort failed. Paulus remained bound by Hitler's direct orders. In January, the Soviets launched Operation Ring, the final assault to crush the pocket. Soviet artillery flattened the remaining positions, while infantry closed in, block by block. On January 31, 1943, Soviet troops captured Paulus's headquarters in the basement of the Univermag department store. Surrounded and out of supplies, Paulus surrendered. 2 days later, on February 2nd, the last pockets of resistance in northern Stalingrad were overrun. Of the 250,000 men trapped in the Kessel, only about 91,000 were taken prisoner. Fewer than 6,000 would ever return to Germany after years of captivity. The German Sixth Army, once the pride of the Wehrmacht, had been utterly destroyed. For the first time, Hitler's aura of invincibility was shattered. Aftermath: the turning of the tide. The Battle of Stalingrad was one of the bloodiest confrontations in human history. It lasted over 5 months, from August 1942 to February 1943. The cost was almost beyond comprehension. More than 2 million people, soldiers and civilians, were killed, wounded, or captured. The city itself was reduced to rubble. Not a single building remained undamaged. Yet out of the ruins, the Soviet Union emerged stronger. Stalingrad marked the first decisive defeat of the German army. It destroyed the myth of Nazi invincibility and shifted the balance of power in the East. From that point on, the Red Army would begin an unrelenting push westward, through Kursk, across Ukraine, into Poland, and finally to Berlin. For Germany, Stalingrad was a psychological catastrophe. The loss stunned the Axis powers and inspired resistance movements across occupied Europe. Even in neutral countries, the battle was seen as proof that Hitler could be defeated. In the Soviet Union, Stalingrad became sacred ground, a symbol of national sacrifice and endurance. The defenders were hailed as heroes, and the city would later be awarded the title of Hero City in recognition of its suffering and valor. Historians often describe Stalingrad as the true turning point of World War II. It was not just a military victory, but a moral one, proof that determination, resilience, and unity could triumph over even the greatest of evils. In the frozen ruins of a shattered city, the course of history changed forever.